All right, good morning, everybody. We'll begin our Monday, April 15th, 2019 briefings with a review of the Budget Advisory Committee's recommendations and a reserve policy. Before we get started, we'll go around and do introductions for the record.
Sharon Trask.
Jim Madsen. Patty McGuire.
Jennifer Byerly. Paige Hansen. Cheryl Hill.
Jason Dressel.
Ryan Sperling.
Travis Adams.
Dawn Twitty.
Kelly Frazier.
Frank Pinter.
Randy Nevin.
And Kevin Schutte. Okay, Frank.
So this is a repeat of the review of the Mason County Citizens Budget Advisory Committee recommendations from last week. The primary recommendation from that committee was to have the board support a citizen-led initiative to pursue a voter-approved multi-year lid lift to the maximum amount allowable. The lid lift would be used for criminal justice and public safety needs and would be specified in the initiative as to how the funds would be spent. The secondary recommendation was to direct the elected officials and department heads to continue to annually review fees and increase them for services as necessary. The third recommendation was a list of following recommendations in the order of priority, which is to have the board support and or lead an initiative to pursue a voter-approved county-wide metropolitan park district with a more cohesive and cogent focus. This would reduce the unfunded services expenses from the general fund that would be used to supplement and expand criminal justice and public safety programs. Recommendation number 2 was to recognize this need for supplemental jail facilities and to fund the construction cost of a new jail with a voter-approved criminal justice levy of 0.5 cents per thousand of assessed property value for the 6 years allowable under the RCW, and initiate a 0.3% sales tax increase to be used for inmate outsourcing, and ultimately, with an increased capacity offered by a new jail facility, offer increased staffing needs for that facility. Recommendation number 3 is to ask the board to have staff review the opportunity, upon review and concurrence with juvenile professionals, to outsource the current juvenile detention services to Kitsap County for North End citizens and to Thurston County for South End citizens. Recommendation number 4 was to provide opportunities for its employees to work more efficiently by continuing to move forward with increasing and more productive, citizen-centric electronic advancements that improve, simplify, and expand services to the citizens of Mason County by using electronic services and lean practices. Again, these 4 recommendations were set in the order of priority, highest to lowest. This also gives us an opportunity to review the Mason County Public Safety and Criminal Justice Task Force recommendations that were put forward on July 30th of 2014. This was a previous committee that was put together by the board and put recommendations to the board in 2014. Its first recommendation was to shift an additional $1 million from the roads fund to the general fund, in addition to the current amount of what was then $1.2 million for the purpose of criminal justice needs. It is also strongly recommended these monies are to augment and not supplant funding. That committee's second recommendation was the additional $1 million is to be used for non-personnel improvements and equipment needs of the criminal justice community, i.e. video court systems, software systems for the prosecutor's office, radio and or equipment upgrades at the sheriff's office. Recommendation number 3 was to create a campaign committee to pursue a voter-approved lid lift campaign that would make the county levy average to its comparable counties. This lid lift would be equivalent to $2 to $2.5 million increase in funding that would include a buyback clause for the city of Shelton. This lid lift would specifically be used for criminal justice and public safety funding that would augment and not supplant any current funding levies. This is not a new tax, but a permanent shift of dollars from the roads funds to the general expense fund. Recommendation number 4 was to create a campaign committee to pursue a voter-approved county, city, metropolitan park district that would improve county and city parks, open spaces, and recreational opportunities that would include public and private partnerships. The dollars freed up from the general expense to cover the costs of parks and recreation would be earmarked specifically for the purpose of criminal justice and public safety. The two committees suggested 2 identical recommendations. One was to support the efforts of a campaign committee to present to the voters a proposition to lift property taxes to an average of our comparables, with the proceeds to augment criminal justice and public safety expenses. The second was to support the efforts of a campaign committee to present to the voters a proposition to create a countywide metropolitan park district and use the savings created in the general fund to augment current criminal justice and public safety expenses. The 2 recommendations were already put to a vote. The lid lift was put to a vote in November of 2017 and lost with 67% of the vote. There was no citizen committee to disseminate a cohesive message, and no details as to how the additional revenue would be spent. The Metropolitan Park District was put to a vote in November of 2016 and lost with a 64.5% of the vote. Even after the Trust for Public Lands county-wide survey by FM3 Associates had indicated that 55% of the citizens supported the proposition. No citizen committee was created to disseminate a public education campaign, and there was no community engagement. No board participation in development of a plan as to how the Parks District would function. So these 2 were put forward to the voters, and the voters voted them down by better than a 60+% margin. Very little communication was put forward to the citizens to disseminate a cohesive message, as well as how the funding that was additional would be spent. Lessons learned from previous failed votes. Citizen involvement is necessary. It should include a public education outreach campaign, which should include reasons why to vote yes, reasons why not to vote no, should have defined positions against potential opposition arguments. It should define a reason for the need and the purpose or use of additional revenues, as well as a detailed outline of where the additional funds would be spent. It should solicit collaboration with regional partners, criminal justice and public safety advocates, City of Shelton, MACECOM, local school boards, Trust for Public Lands, Shelton Metropolitan Park District, and so forth. Here's some of the specifics around what it was that the committees had presented to the board. A multi-year lid lift is allowed under RCW 8455.0502. It allows counties to exceed the 1% annual lid lift for any of its levies for up to a maximum of 6 years. The lid lift is temporary. All subsequent levies are limited to a 1% annual increase until the measure expires, at which point the maximum allowable levy reverts to what it would have been without the lid lift. If it is permanent, all subsequent levies are limited to a 1% annual increase, and the levy increase never expires or reverts back to the original highest lawful levy. Cannot use a levy lid lift if county is levying its statutory maximum rate. So what that is saying is if there are limitations as to how high the county taxes can go, and if it is at that maximum rate, it cannot do a lid lift. I'll have examples to show that we're well below that in the next slide or two. Must use all of its bank capacity before seeking a levy lid lift. Revenues may be used for any limited purpose. Requires simple majority voter approval, and the election must be the August primary or the November general. If it's the August primary, it must be submitted to the auditor by May 10th of 2019. Only King County had 4 successful ballots in the last 4 years. 4 other counties had failed ballots that it had put forward in the last 4 years.
Rick, can I just
Sure.
stop 1 second? Patty, can you confirm that May 10th date?
It is correct.
Is that right?
So here's what a permanent levy lid lift would look like. So where we have, this is years and this is dollars going up the scale. So as the 1% lawful levy increase represents the slight increase in the blue portion of the column, the lid lift, which would be the green portion of the column, allows for any number above what you're currently collecting up to the maximum allowable rate. So for these 5 additional years, the allowable increase is as defined in the proposition authorized. At the end of the 5 years, it would stay at that high rate and then only be allowed to go 1% from that point forward annually. The multi-year lid lift ballot measure must include, must state the total levy duration, so you can have any number of 1 through 6 years. If permanent, the measure must state that, or that the dollar amount of the levy will be used for the purpose of computing limitations for subsequent levies. What I mean by that is that if you're going to do a lid lift and expect to continue to use the increased rate, then that statute or the proposition must state that future rates will be based on the higher increased levy rate after the lid lift has been successful. State the maximum tax rate to be collected for the first year, i.e. 1.5 cents per thousand. State the limit factor to be used for all subsequent years, stated as an annual percentage increase or inflation index. The amounts do not need to be the same for each year. So in other words, you could say, I want to raise it 35 cents per thousand in year 1, or you can say that I want to raise it 2% a year, or 5% a year, as long as it keeps your rate under the maximum allowable. You can, in the proposition, state the exemption for senior citizens and persons with disabilities under RCW 8436-381 if the county wishes to exempt these individuals. So in that proposition, if you choose to exempt senior citizens with and or citizens with disabilities, you must state it, and then that exemption would be put forward by the taxing authority. The revenue potential for a lid lift, the levy rate for 2019 is 1.2425610, which currently generates $10,207,000 worth of revenue. The maximum allowable is $1.80. If we were to raise it to the $1.80, that would generate $4,580,000 worth of additional revenue. That $4,500,000 may eliminate the need for some of the 2.16 traffic diversion that we currently have. The 2017 proposition requested an increase of 37 cents to $1.77. That would have cost a homeowner with a home value of about $150,000, $55.50 a year of additional property tax. A board-approved single-year lid lift with an equal reduction in road funds is a levy shift. So the difference between a levy shift is something that is levy shifted by the commission through its resolution and its decisioning powers of the dais. It's allowed under RCW 8452.043.1. It allows the county to shift a certain dollar amount from the road levy to the current expense general fund levy, thus increasing the current expense levy rate and reducing the road levy rate. The resulting current expense levy rate cannot exceed $2.47.5 per thousand, and total combined road and current expense levy rates cannot exceed $4.05 per thousand of assessed value. Shifted revenues are unrestricted and may be used for any lawful government purpose. A road levy shift cannot cause another taxing district's levy to be reduced. The levy shift must be reduced, eliminated, or bought down before pro-rationing can take place. This does not require voter approval. Levy shift revenue potential. In 2019, without pro-rationing, a levy shift would have generated maximum $3,203,000 into the general expense fund. This would have reduced the road fund by the same amount. So a levy shift simply takes money out of the road fund and moves it over into the general expense fund. It reduces the amount of revenue that the road fund collects on that year and increases that amount into the current expense fund, and that can be used for any lawful government purpose. The shifted levy funds may be used for any lawful government purpose within the incorporated or unincorporated county. A road levy shift does not affect a county's eligibility for Rural Arterial Program or RAP funding. One-time funds available as this is one-time funds availability as it requires an annual approval, as well as an annual analysis to determine whether or not there's a pro-rationing that's required or a buy-down that's required. So moving the funds from the road fund into the general fund may put a junior taxing district into jeopardy as to not being able to collect all of its funds. So in 2016, when we did this, the city's Metropolitan Park District was pro-rationed, and we ended up buying them down for the amount of the tax that they were unable to collect and transferring to them out of the general funds to cover the cost of what they were not allowed to tax. The Metropolitan Park District is authorized per RCW 3561. Previous proposition voted on November 8th in 2016 failed with a 64.4% against vote, even though a previous survey showed a 55% approval and a 40% rejection rate. The strongest support was in District 2, and then that survey included a rate that would have been charged to the citizens. So when that rate was $43 a year, it was rejected at 62%, but when the rate was dropped in half, it was approved by 65% of the citizens. So the survey showed that as the rate per year went up, the approval factor went down, but when it got down to $21 per household, then the approval rating shot up to 65%. Through that survey, 50% were more likely to support if it merged with the Shelton Metropolitan Park District. In 2019, the county would save $490,000 worth in expenses. A Metropolitan Park District at 50 cents per thousand can generate $3,350,000 worth of revenue. At 75%, which is the maximum allowable, it would generate a little over $5 million annually. It requires majority voter approval, and the Park District can pay back county for its contributed facilities. Some parks cannot be transferred because they were funded by RCO. There would need to be an analysis of which portion of which parks were funded by RCO, those would have to stay with the county. And then we could lease or contract with the Metropolitan Park District to service those facilities, but ownership can't be transferred if it was purchased with grant funding from RCO. The elected officials, offices, and departments heads, as part of the budget process, they should review opportunities to increase fees, service charges, fines, and penalties. Should acquire supporting grants and subsidies, parks and recreational facilities charges, public records copying fees, clerical court filing and service fees. Some of these fees are restricted by RCW, but in any case, as they are allowing for additional increases, we should be budgeting for those as well. The criminal justice tax levy, that's allowed under RCW 8452-135. Any county with a population of 90,000 or less may impose an additional property tax levy of up to 50 cents per thousand of assessed valuation for 6 consecutive years for criminal justice purposes. The revenue must be used for criminal justice purposes. The measure requires a supermajority voter approval, subject to validation and minimum voter turnout requirements. Meaning, if the vote is done in on an election date where the turnout is lower than, let's say, a general election, there are certain validation minimum voter turnout requirements that are calculated into the analysis to determine whether or not it was approved or not. It's for a maximum of 6 years, unless resubmitted to the voters, so it can be done twice, or as many times as the voters approve it. Levy is not subject to the $5.90 local limit, but is subject to the $10 constitutional limit, and may be subject to prorationing if the $10 limit is exceeded. The ballot measure for a criminal justice tax levy requires a criminal justice levy may be submitted at any special primary or general election and requires a 60% supermajority vote. According to MRSC's local ballot measure database, the only county to attempt this measure in recent years was Wycombe, and the measure failed. The criminal justice tax revenue potential at 50 cents per thousand will generate $4,107,000 a year. With 6 years available to impose the tax, the revenue potential is at least $25 million at the max of 50 cents per thousand. The average household with $150,000 worth of assessed value would pay an additional $75 per year to cover the cost of this tax. Public safety sales tax, this was another proposal put forward. Allowable under RCW 8214-450 and can increase the sales tax up to 0.3%. Revenues are partially restricted, meaning 1/3 of it must be used for criminal justice and or for fire protection. May be imposed by any county. The revenue, however, is shared with the cities. The motor vehicle sales and the first 36 months of motor vehicle leases are exempt from the tax, and it requires a majority voter approval. Here's what our retail sales tax in the county and the city looks like today. So the county sales tax is 0.85%. The city has a 0.088. Both of them have the same taxes, except that the city has added a 0.2% transportation district tax, as well as they have already enacted the public safety tax at 0.1%. Here's what the retail sales tax in comparable or local counties and cities look like. And you can review what they are. Mason County and Shelton are in the average of all of our regional and comparable counties. The public safety sales tax revenue potentials. Cities and towns may impose a public safety sales tax with a lower maximum rate of 0.1%. However, the combined city-county rate may not exceed 0.3%. For instance, if the county imposes a rate of 0.2 and the city imposes a rate of 0.1, the total combined rate will be 0.3%. However, if the city imposes a 0.1 sales tax first, then the county imposes a 0.3 sales tax at a later date, the county must credit the 0.1 back to the city, effectively lowering the county's rate to 2% within 0.2% within the city, so that the combined rate doesn't exceed the 0.3% rate. The revenue potential. The revenue is shared, so the revenue is shared between the city and the county and its cities, but the exact formula depends on which jurisdiction, city or county, or both, that place the issue on the ballot. The county retains 60% of any countywide public safety sales tax revenue, while the remaining 40% is distributed to the cities within the county on a pro capita population basis. If a city imposes a public safety sales tax, the city retains 85% of the revenues and shares the balance, 15%, with the county. In addition, the Department of Revenue retains a 1% administrative fee. Below are examples. So if 1% is approved by the county would receive $511,650. The city of Shelton would receive $547,350, of which the city receives $233,750 already. So that would be an increase to the city of $313,600. If the county approves the 0.2%, the county would receive almost $1 million. The city would receive $861,000, of which the $233,700 it already receives, which is an increase of $627,000 to the city. If a 0.3 is approved by the county, $1,287,000 would be received by the county. The city would receive just over $1 million, again, of which $233,000 is already being taxed by them. So that would be an increase of $831,000. And this is for 2018 data. So another recommendation that was put forward by the committee was to outsource juvenile services. What I have here is RCW 1304-116, which defines that a juvenile shall not be confined in a jail or holding facility for adults, except, and it outlines where that exception is. And I won't read through that. It basically says it can't be within earshot of an adult, and it can't be in an adult jail facility. Additionally, RCW 1304-135 is the establishment of house or room detention for juveniles. Counties containing more than 50,000 inhabitants shall, and counties containing a lesser number of inhabitants may, provide and maintain at public expense a detention room or house of detention separated or removed from any jail or police station, to be in charge of a matron or other person of good character, wherein all children within the provisions of this chapter shall, when necessary, be sheltered. So this is the RCW that requires that we as a county provide juvenile services facilities for sheltering juveniles. The potential revenue or savings. The 2019 budgeted cost of detention services is $690,000. How much of the savings would depend on the legality of outsourcing for Mason County? how an outsourced program would be designed. Also, outsourcing would require an increased cost to outsource to the supplier. In other words, in lieu of us paying for it internally, we would then pay for the outsourcing on a per day, per person basis to somebody else. And depending on what that contract would look like, there would be an additional cost to that. There would also need to be a substantial investment in transportation, as well as a substantial disruption to the Mason County citizens, as the citizens of Mason County, the parents of Mason County juveniles that are being detained in facilities located either in Kitsap or in Thurston would have to leave the county in order to visit their children. Next recommendation was to utilize lean and Kaizen process reviews. That would create opportunities for more efficient employees, easier phone system, laserfish document management are things that we're already doing and looking at to expand for more efficient processes. Again, we're looking at online permitting, we're looking at online human resources services, financial management transparency to the citizens, and then use Munis, which is our county computer program, more effectively. So, summary. The multi-year lid lift maximum revenue would be a little over $4.5 million after a vote. A levy shift, would generate $3,200,000 with no vote necessary, but it must be enacted annually. The formation of a metropolitan park district saves about $490,000 and it requires a voter approval. Fee revenue would generate about $270,000, $75,000 annually. A criminal justice tax levy would generate about $4 million a year, or about $25 million in 6 years, and requires voter approval. A public safety sales tax at 0.3% would generate just under $1,300,000 for the county, and it requires voter approval. And outsourcing juvenile services would save $690,000 and requires court and professional review, but the cost of outsourcing is unknown at this time, so what the savings would be is unknown as well at this time. Questions?
Well, very good, thank you, Frank. Commissioners, any questions for Frank? Any comments for Frank?
I think I would like to sit down with you and go over
Absolutely. There's a lot of information
a
there.
lot of information.
Do you mind if I just a process question? We know we have the May 10th date to get something on the ballot.
For August.
Right. And in the past, we've done this through a public hearing process, so there has to be a 2-week
Correct.
notice for that. So just from a process perspective, when should we be making a decision so that we can hit those other benchmarks?
As soon as possible. Within the next 2 weeks would be recommended,
Okay.
at the max.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Commissioner, if you wanted to refer it to the November ballot, August 6th would be the deadline.
Okay.
So you have two choices if you want to get on the ballot this year.
Okay, perfect.
And if it's in reference to the sales tax, Department of Revenue requires 75 days advance notice of an approved measure. So that would not generate sales tax increases on January 1, but would rather generate sales tax increases on April 1st of 2020.
If it was passed.
So if it was passed in November,
In November.
there isn't 75 days advance notice to Department of Revenue.
Okay. Commissioner?
So for me, going over all these, I appreciate all the work that everybody did from that citizens committee, but you know, if you think about this, is a lot of tax increase, and tax increase. But what's the surprise? Because when you put the question to the people that were working on it, on how do we provide more services, better services for everybody, every department is hurting. There's no surprise it would come back with the only option, because there's no recommendations for cuts anywhere. The only option is to get more money. But we gotta be real careful on what we're doing, because, you know, it's always nice to say we need more money, but they've always asked us to work within our means, so I hope we do our best to stay there.
If I may, the Citizens Advisory Committee looked at the mandates that are put upon the county. And in their review, recognized that the county can barely keep up with the mandates and couldn't come forward with recommendations to cut, because every department has more mandates than it has funding to provide for those mandates.
Which we look over every year and recognize that. That's the nature of this beast.
Yes.
Okay, so, would you recommend that we come back Monday with a little bit
Yes.
more clarity?
Yeah, I would recommend that we review for any recommendation the board wants to put forward at our next briefing on Monday. If the board wants to put something on the ballot and or recommend a development of a steering committee or some sort of a citizens outreach program, that can all be put into place in the next couple of weeks, with sufficient time for hearings as well as times for notification to the auditor's office.
One of the things I noticed is that they mentioned over and over again, though, is citizen-led. Do we have a citizen group leading any request to?
I think it said,
Citizen-led
the
but
board recommended support the efforts of a campaign committee for lid lift. Yep, I believe the recommendations were that the board recommend and support the development of a Metropolitan Park District committee, or support and or lead an initiative to pursue a voter-approved countywide Metropolitan Park District, or support a citizen-led initiative to pursue a lid lift. Those were the two recommendations. So it would be board approved and supported citizens committee.
currently, is there any citizens committee out there that is looking to do any of this
Not
stuff that would be citizen-led?
No.
And I think that may be because there isn't a proposal out there for people to support. So, I think it's probably a chicken and egg kind of conversation.
Correct.
Well, because the last time we had the Metropolitan Parks District, that was a citizen-led event. But again, I'm thinking back though, there was one commissioner that was actually pushing it beforehand, so maybe it was still viewed as a commission thing
Could be.
to bring it forward. Just trying to be fair on that, because I'm thinking back at how that worked.
But there was very little, there wasn't a cohesive message on how that program would work. A Metropolitan Park District doesn't need to have a separate board set up at the outset. It can be designed so that it starts with the county board and then moves into an elected board environment as the board and the function is set up.
Has there been any communication with the city? Because one of the recommendations also was a countywide to include the city. Has there been any conversations with the city in regards to their parks district? Because currently that goes into their fund. They actually separate out how much they take each year because they want more for their general fund budget, so they.
Not in any specifics, other than a notice of we're having this meeting to understand that the county is looking at it again, as well as a 0.3%. that would impact the city as well.
Okay. Any other questions or,
No, right now.
okay, so we'll plan to come back Monday
So
with,
I'll meet with each of you individually during the week, and then we'll come back next Monday to come forward with any recommendations or additional discussion.
And I don't mind adding now, if we're gonna, I honestly don't believe we could look at all. I think it's gonna have to be a very select few, or one. I know that I lean a lot towards the criminal justice sales tax, if it's structured in a way to where it takes care of the things that we need to do. The one problem that we have with that is, if we were to bring that forward and use that now, if we do end up with something for the jail later on, that money that we will have needed for the expansion of staff to handle a larger jail will have been eaten up by how we designated out before we have the jail.
and I think there are opportunities that, and I agree, I think the 0.3% is probably the most viable option on the list. I think there are ways that we could plan for that potential, and be able to meet some of those needs through that now and in the future, with good planning and, certainly I think as we get further down the road with Grace Harbor County and with potential bringing on of the consultant, be able to plan, even deeper into that. So I think the initial work is gonna be upfront in figuring out, truing up the revenue potential, and then, then being clear about what our priorities are within that. With an eye to one eye to solving current issues and an eye to the future as well.
And this kind of leads into the conversation around strategic planning, so that as we develop a much more robust strategic planning program, these pieces can be put into that analysis and put into a timeline over the next 3 to 5 years as it relates to new jail construction, if any, and what costs and or revenues would be needed to support that.
I think in the past, a lot of the problems was the messaging, not getting the word out, not letting the public know where the monies were going and why.
Well, also, not everybody was in favor of it on the commission. It makes a difference, because you can't have a joint messaging when everybody's got different beliefs on how it should be done, or whether it should be done at all. One of them wasn't even ours at all, but somehow, because we put it on the ballot, it became a question that they expected or thought that we were behind it and supporting it, and there was no real structure on it. I mean, literally, it could have been anything every other day, depending on which person you talk to, that was pushing it forward. Everything from the parks are gonna close if we don't do it, which was never an option, to, we'll take everything, we'll build a pool, it all depended on who you're talking to, because it wasn't us.
So I will bring it back next week. I'll meet with each of you for any questions or any in-depth questions around what was presented, and then we can discuss next week.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.